Serial murder is usually regarded as one of the most heinous activities a person can engage in, and serial killers are among the most feared of public enemies. It is therefore expected that the authorities will do everything in their power to stop them, no matter where they are. But what happens when the murderer is one of the highest authorities in the government? I'm the Lunar Librarian, and since my last serial killer video is by far my most popular, this is the story of Crown Prince Sado, the murderous, unstable heir to the Joseon Kingdom and his bloody, unpredictable reign of terror which gripped the royal palace of 18th century Korea. As an aside, this case is from Korea, and I don't speak Korean. I'll do my best with pronunciations, but if I get any of them wrong, let me know in the comments. Thank you. Alright, since I forgot to record this with the video, here's a quick content warning. This video contains discussion of domestic abuse and sexual assault, so if you're not going to be okay with that, then skip this one. With that out of the way, Prince Sado was born in 1735, the second son of the Joseon king Yeongjo. Despite being the second son, Sado was the king's oldest surviving child, since his brother had died in 1728. Sado was therefore the heir apparent to the Joseon Kingdom from the time he was born. Sado's childhood wasn't particularly easy. His father began grooming him to rule from an early age, something which placed considerable pressure on Sado. He found it difficult to live up to his father's high expectations, a situation that was not helped by his father's tendency to ridicule Sado publicly for any perceived shortcomings. As a result of all of this, Sado and his father had a poor relationship. In addition to his familial stress, Sado fell seriously ill in 1745. The prince's illness was so severe that for weeks he slipped in and out of consciousness and was at one point expected to die. Miraculously, Sado recovered from this illness, although the experience made the extreme anxiety he felt even worse. Sado began to experience occasional hallucinations, delusions, and extreme paranoia, particularly in regards to thunder. He also developed vestophobia, or a fear of clothing, which would plague him throughout his life. Although Sado had a poor relationship with his father, he was close with both his grandmother, Inwon, and his mother-in-law, Queen Jongsong, throughout his childhood. They had helped him manage the worst of symptoms of his mental illness, something which was rarely acknowledged, let alone understood at the time. They also did their best to protect him from the worst of his father's pressures. However, in 1757, Inwon and Queen Jongsong died, both within a month of each other. Sado was devastated by their loss, which brought about further deterioration of his mental condition, as well as his relationship with his father. While Sado's mental condition was rapidly deteriorating, his authority within the kingdom continued to grow. Sado got married to Lady Yeongjo and became his father's regent in 1750, only 15 years old at the time. As regent, Sado held authority over administrative decisions within the kingdom. He was also required to attend the same meetings and court events as his father, given his responsibility to run the kingdom if his father were to become incapacitated. This busy schedule was extremely stressful for the young prince. Furthermore, his father would berate him publicly in front of the entire court for any perceived shortcomings or mistake, humiliating Sado in front of both his peers and senior courtiers. While she was still alive, Queen Jongsong attempted to shield Sado from the worst of his father's ire. However, with her death in 1757, Sado was left without any supportive voices in his father's court, an ever-increasing pressure and responsibility. Seemingly as an outlet for his frustrations, Sado began to lash out at the servants and ladies-in-waiting who resided at the court. Sado's first murder came just a month after Jongsong's death, when Sado killed and beheaded a eunuch. After the murder, Sado carried the head into his palace quarters, where he forced his wife and several of the ladies-in-waiting to look at it. After this incident, Sado began to regularly murder the palace staff, eunuchs, and servants as an outlet for his frustration. He was also known to sexually assault ladies-in-waiting. In order to avoid consequences for these crimes, Sado forced his wife, Yeongjo, to clean up evidence, hide bodies, and bribe anyone affected by his actions. Sado was not only abusive towards his staff, he was also abusive towards his wife and his secondary consort Yongbin. Hyeyoung was told that if she revealed Sado's crimes or failed to do what he told her, then she would be killed as well. So out of fear for her own safety, she complied and aided Sado whenever he needed a body hidden or a crime scene cleaned. In addition to the stresses of court life, Sado's mental health continued to deteriorate. He suffered from vestophobia since he was a child, but starting in 1758, this fear apparently got much more intense. According to his wife, Lady Hyeyoung, from her personal memoirs, quote, "For him to get dressed, I had to have 10, 20, or even 30 sets of clothes laid out. He would then burn some, supposedly on behalf of some ghost or other. Even after this, if he managed to get into a suit of clothes without incident, one had to count it as great good luck. If, however, those serving him were to make the slightest error, he would not be able to put his clothes on, no matter how hard he tried. In the process, people were hurt, even killed. It was truly dreadful." Sado's fear of clothing was, in many cases, debilitating. This was made worse by the reality that court life had strict social expectations regarding dress and fashion, expectations which were even stricter for Sado as the prince regent and heir to the throne. This clashed severely with his vestophobia and made any court function an excruciating experience for Sado, which would cause him to inevitably take out his frustrations on his servants. In 1757, Sado took another consort, Lady Pingay. His relationship with Pingay was just as abusive as his relationship with his wife and other consort. Sado also continued to assault and murder his courtiers and ladies-in-waiting until 1760, when his violent behavior began to escalate. No longer content to just target his servants and spouses, Sado began to lash out at his siblings, parents, and other direct relatives. During a court dinner on his birthday in 1760, he fell into a fit of rage and began threatening, screaming, and attempting to intimidate his parents, siblings, and anyone else at the dinner. He also, in front of the entire court, threatened to kill his half-sister Hwawan. After this, their father placed her under 24/7 guard to protect her from Sado. Following this event, he became even more physically abusive towards his spouses. This abuse escalated until 1761, when Sado beat Pingay to death in a fit of rage. In order to cover his tracks, as Pingay was a noble woman, he forced Hyeyoung to prepare her body for a funeral. Pingay was buried in an unmarked plot in the royal cemetery, and after the funeral, Sado forbade his remaining consorts and servants to mention her in any way. Sado continued his reign of terror until the summer of 1762. During a session of the royal court, Sado got into a verbal altercation with one of his father's advisors, during which he threatened to kill the official's son. Intending to make good on his threat, Sado snuck into the royal palace, which he had been removed from in 1761, and set out to find the advisor's son. When he learned that the child was not in the castle at the time, Sado stole some of his personal effects as a threat to his father. The court, and by extension Sado's father, quickly found out about his incursion. Since he had trespassed in the royal palace, Sado had committed a crime against the crown directly, forcing his father to act against him. However, the law of the Joseon Kingdom utilized communal punishment, meaning Sado's children and surviving consorts would also be subject to any punishment levied against Sado. The usual punishment for trespassing was banishment, but Yeongjo was unwilling to inflict this punishment on Hyeong and his grandchildren. Instead, Yeongjo decided to execute Sado in secret, circumventing the legal requirement to punish his relatives. To accomplish this, Yeongjo forced Sado into a locked chest, which was buried in the castle courtyard until he died of starvation on July 12th, 1762. After his death, Sado was exhumed, buried in a royal tomb, and posthumously restored to the position of crown prince, restoring his relatives' honor and sparing them from any legal punishment. Yeongjo had simply hoped to move on from Sado and his crimes. However, since he had been restored to crown prince, his son, Yeongjo, was the heir to the Joseon Kingdom after Sado's death. After Yeongjo's ascension to the throne, his first action was to officially acknowledge his father and to construct a grand royal tomb to replace the understated burial plot he was interred in. This was not the last posthumous recognition Sado would receive. In 1899, Sado was made a posthumous Emperor of Korea by the then Emperor Gwangmu. Despite his extreme violence and abuse, and the fact that he was never actually the king, Sado was posthumously recognized as an emperor, given that Gwangmu was among his direct descendants. The number of victims Sado claimed is entirely unknowable, given his ability to cover up most of his murders. Likely, Sado is responsible for several dozen killings, but there is no way of knowing the exact number with any certainty. However, Sado's reign of terror among the servants, eunuchs, and ladies-in-waiting of the Joseon Kingdom still remains a horrifying reminder that sometimes the wealthiest and most powerful people will abuse that power for horrific purposes. I've been the Lunar Librarian. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more historical true crime cases like this one. Until next time, goodbye.